Welcome to another deep dive. And, today we're really taking a deep dive into something I think pretty incredible that you, our listener, sent to us. It's this text that explores like the connections between our consciousness, the energy all around us, and our spiritual selves. It's pretty fascinating stuff. And what we're going to try to do today is pull out the most important ideas from it and really see how they might actually make a difference in your life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the text you shared, it really does touch on some pretty big concepts. Everything from how we're all interconnected, like within the universe, to the role of consciousness, to the energy that kind of animates it. We're going to be looking at this idea of a spirit form and the power that's like within our thoughts and feelings, this notion of aligning with creational laws. And it even kind of takes us on a little detour through ancient spirituality and the development of language. So, yeah, quite a journey.
A lot to unpack here. But one thing that I think, or that I thought was so interesting, and that I'm guessing will grab you too, is this idea of taking control. Like the text kind of hints that by understanding and working with these universal principles, you might be able to ease some of those struggles in life. You know what I mean? Maybe find like a greater sense of well-being. So, okay, let's just jump right in and try to unpack this whole idea of consciousness and creational laws.
Yeah, right from the start, the text makes this pretty big statement that as humans, we are part of a universe that operates based on these fixed and everlasting laws, right? And the ultimate aim of this whole system, the evolution of evolving consciousness. And it's interesting because when we start to align our everyday lives with this bigger kind of life purpose, it's not just some like abstract philosophical idea, right? It's presented as like a real pathway to understanding ourselves better, and gaining more control.
It's about active participation, not just like passively existing. And so if we do consciously try to get in sync with this like life purpose, what kind of benefits are we talking about here?
Well, the text suggests some pretty significant potential positive changes. It talks about how by grasping these underlying laws, we could become better at positively influencing our surroundings, actively seeking out, the things that bring us value, navigating those tough times, and learning to overcome them. It really stresses that an authentic life goes way beyond just, formal education, and it's deeply connected to these creational laws and guidelines, these natural cycles of growth and decline that are happening all around us all the time.
Like the seasons, right? Like there's a natural rhythm to life, there's ups and downs, and the text talks about how even those difficult times, they fit into this larger picture.
Exactly. Adversity isn't seen as like some, random punishment. It's more like a vital opportunity for us to learn, right?
Yeah.
See where we might be, going off course, and actively find solutions. Challenges are actually essential, right, for our growth. And what's constantly at work beneath the surface of all this, is this idea of creational energies, these ongoing forces, within us that are shaping our consciousness and influencing those experiences that are yet to come.
So it's like we're all part of this big universal flow, right?
Yeah.
Guided by these fundamental laws and powered by these energies. And the text also mentions that we can actually tap into these energies ourselves. So tell us more about this whole idea of energy flow and the power of our intention.
Yeah, one of the big ideas here is this concept of oscillating waves, right, that are generated by these laws of creation. And you can think of these laws, sending out energetic ripples, just like waves in the ocean, right? And the text suggests that these waves, have a direct impact on us. And we actually have the ability to consciously interact with them by intentionally focusing our awareness, our thoughts, our emotions. We can shape our inner world by actively receiving these potent energetic flows that originate from these universal laws.
That's like we have a dial, and we can kind of tune ourselves into these creative frequencies.
In a way, yeah. Yeah. The text proposes that even like a small amount of focused attention, directed towards these influences, it can lead to, really significant positive outcomes,
Yeah.
like improving our well-being and even aiding and healing from things that are unjust, careless, and ignorant of the truth. The key is conscious choice, right, and active engagement.
So how do we actually engage with these energies? I mean, is it simply thinking positive thoughts, or is there more to it?
It goes deeper than that.
Yes.
Yeah, the text emphasizes the role of our thoughts, our feelings, and a strong will, and deliberately accessing these streams of, creative energy. But it also points out that our desire to connect with this energy, it needs to be genuine, right? It can't just be like a fleeting or superficial wish. And it also stresses the importance of using these, neutral forces, right, for positive and constructive purposes, actively avoiding any negativity or, harmful intentions. This is what, according to the text, this is what truly fosters prosperity, not just for ourselves, but for the broader human experience, supporting the evolution of our consciousness.
So our intention shapes how we interact with this energy, not just having access to it, but what we choose to do with it. And the text even touches on the idea of rewards and consequences in relation to this.
It does. It does. It says that, we create our own rewards and consequences with unwavering certainty, founded on the thoughts and feelings you nurture and the actions you undertake. It highlights the importance of living in harmony, not just with the positive aspects, but also acknowledging and integrating those dissonant forces, the dualities that we see in life to achieve that sense of balance. It's about understanding and aligning with these laws of creation as the fundamental key, to navigating life effectively.
This is all pointing toward, us being active participants in creating our reality. Now let's move on to this concept of the inner self and the spirit form. It sounds like we're getting into some of the more profound, maybe even mystical aspects of the text.
It does. It does. The text introduces the idea that each of us, right, we all have this deeper inner self, the spirit form, and it's described as the very source that gives energy to our consciousness, right? It's characterized as a small segment of creation, so a direct link, back to this universal source we keep talking about. And interestingly, it even mentions a specific physical location in the body that it connects to this essence, an area in the midbrain called the superior colliculus, involved in processing sensory information. So there's this like physical anchoring point for the spiritual essence within us.
So there's this biological location tied to this spiritual idea. That's a pretty wild connection to make. And what's the nature of this spirit form? What is it?
Well, the text really emphasizes this idea of its eternal nature. It says that it remains unaffected by, physical sensations like temperature, hunger, pain. It's the constant within us, that single eternal component of our being. And according to the text, when our physical leaves, right, it returns to its own realm and then waits for a new incarnation, and it re-enters a new human form around the 3-week mark of development, bringing with it a fresh consciousness, subconsciousness, and personality shaped by the broader consciousness that it's connected to.
So it's a cycle of leaving and returning, connected to the physical body, but ultimately separate from it. And the text draws parallels between this and the cycles we see in nature, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. These fundamental principles are reflected throughout, all of life, all of existence, mirroring those, cycles of death and rebirth in the plant kingdom, the interplay of light and shadow, the ebb and flow of the tides, and, countless other natural phenomena that are governed by these laws of creation throughout, the cosmos. And it even reminds us that these vast natural cycles unfolding over millions of years, they're beyond human control, right? Highlighting a universal order, that encompasses far more than just, humanity.
It's a perspective that really puts our individual lives, within a much larger and more timeless context. Now let's explore this idea of hidden energies and emotional vibrations. This sounds like we're getting into how we subtly kind of interact with one another.
Yeah, this is where the text looks at the unseen influences, in our everyday interactions. It proposes that there's this unseen fluidic energy, radiating from people that intuitively conveys, our emotions, whether it's, compassion or aversion. And these emotional vibrations, they can significantly influence, our thoughts, our emotions, our overall mental state. And the text also points out that people that have different levels of, sensitivity to these energetic radiations,
So that gut feeling you get when you meet someone, you're maybe picking up on something more than just their words or body language.
That's the implication here. And it even extends this idea to like why we might feel, a heavy atmosphere in a room, even if it looks, physically clean and tidy, right? This could be due to residual invisible fluidic energy that was left behind from past emotional and mental impulses, or even the personalities, of people who've been in that space. It's like our emotional states, that they leave an energetic imprint, right? That can subtly affect our environment.
Like emotions leave a residue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the text also touches on this fascinating connection between the development of language and our spiritual awareness, and it brings in some scientific research.
It does. It mentions the FOXP2 gene, which became active, approximately 200,000 years ago, and it's linked to both, language and our capacity for spirituality. And it references a 2019 article in Current Biology that highlighted, relatively rapid key mutations in this gene that are believed to have made, more complex communication possible. And interestingly, Neanderthals also possessed this language gene, suggesting these genetic changes occurred even before modern humans and Neanderthals diverged.
So the ability to use language has very deep roots, right? And the text connects this to the emergence of spirituality as well.
It does, yeah. It suggests that following the activation of the FOXP2 gene, other genes related to, complex social behaviors, cognitive abilities, even skin pigmentation began to evolve. And this led to physical changes, in early humans, like a higher, more rounded brain, smaller faces and brow ridges, a more prominent chin. And it also points to Neanderthal burial practices as some of the earliest evidence of, spiritual beliefs. And it connects this to, the later development of, artistic expression, like cave paintings, around 32,000 years ago.
That's a pretty huge leap in our evolution. And there's also mention of the domestication of dogs, right, around this same time period.
Right. The text notes that around the same time, a gene associated with, the domestication of dogs also became active, specifically the amylase, AMY2B gene, which helps with digesting starch. And domesticated dogs, they began showing, multiple copies of this gene compared to wolves, indicating this evolutionary divergence, right, and adaptation in their ability to process starches, likely related to their association with, human settlements. So it's an interesting parallel evolutionary development.
It's so fascinating how the text connects all these seemingly unrelated things like language, spirituality, even our relationship with animals, within this broader evolutionary timeline. Now let's move on to how the text defines source, energy, and spirit. How are these fundamental concepts explained?
Yeah, it explains these concepts in pretty simple terms, It defines spirit and source as the underlying causes of our experiences of abundance and prosperity. And it emphasizes that this manifests through our feelings. Understanding this principle, gives us this clearer idea of where our motivation comes from and how we can intentionally connect with it, especially during times when we might feel powerless. Think of source as the ultimate origin of all things, right? And spirit as how that energy actively flows and expresses itself, within us and around us.
So recognizing that connection between this fundamental source and our own inner emotional world, and how does it explain spirit energy specifically?
Well, it describes spirit as an energy that's always in motion, continually flowing forward in time. And it suggests that we are inherently part of this flow, and the key is to align ourselves with it, right? Making the best possible use of our current circumstances while maintaining a positive and optimistic outlook. And it goes on to say that it's the very nature of the source of spirit to create increase, right? And expansion, both through us and for us, because we are always in harmony with it.
That's a very encouraging, forward-looking definition. Now, how does the text suggest we actually listen for spirit in our daily lives? How do we hear it?
Well, the text, it offers some practical advice here. It suggests that, when we take a break from our usual routines, and the constant busyness, that our deeper desires can surface. And these desires, they hold clues to our true life purpose because they originate from spirit. It describes spirit's communication as subtle. It's like subtle whispers and inner urging that often arises when we are most relaxed, right? Not focused on any, particular problem or task.
So it's about creating some quiet space to hear those inner nudges.
Exactly. And the text, it emphasizes that spirit has its own form of intelligence, right? And it's the guiding force behind all of life. Throughout our lives, we learn to express spirit as the spring of original life within ourselves. It uses our individual personalities as the life and substance of the universe. And when we contemplate spirit, we can begin to feel life, being drawn directly from it, experiencing the same thinking power that resides within it. And limitations, it suggests, only arise when we try to force spirit's action, often because we don't fully believe in its inherent, creative power, or because, our ego wants to be in control.
It makes sense. Like trying to force things. That's when we meet with resistance. Now, the text provides this simple technique for strengthening our connection with spirit. What is that? What do we do?
Yeah, it's a very direct method. It suggests sincerely and repeatedly asking the question, "How may I serve?" And repeating this phrase either aloud in private or silently in our minds, as we go about our day. This simple act of offering ourselves, in service, is presented as a powerful way to strengthen that inner connection. It shifts our focus, from what we want to what we can give.
It's subtle, but it's a really powerful shift in perspective.
Yeah.
From what we want to receive to what we can offer. Now, the text also talks about utilizing the power of spirit, those challenging situations. How does that work?
Well, it suggests that when we face, difficult or chaotic situations, if we approach them with respect for the spirit, right, that's also inherent within them, the chaos can actually subside, right? And we can regain that sense of control. It gives the example of a pilot, right, encountering strong turbulence, suggesting that instead of fighting against the wind, reciting a phrase like, I respect the spirit of the wind, or I respect the power of nature and beg its pardon, can be beneficial. It's about acknowledging and working with the forces at play rather than resisting them directly.
Acknowledging those natural forces and working with them rather than against them. And there's even a handy hint for scientists and chemists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it offers a practical tip, for scientists and chemists. It suggests that by respecting the spirit of the elements or chemicals that they're working with, essentially approaching their work with, mindfulness and care, they may experience, far fewer lab accidents. It's an interesting way to frame, careful and respectful interaction with the natural world. It's like acknowledging an inherent order or intelligence within things.
Almost like acknowledging that deeper order. Mm. Now, the text also delves into this idea of contemplating spirit to create new inventions, linking it to like the process of scientific inquiry.
Yeah, it draws a parallel between, how scientific breakthroughs happen, right, and the process of spiritual contemplation. It points out that all, scientific discoveries, they come from questioning, existing combinations, exploring, cause and effect, understanding limitations. By carefully considering, what makes something work, we can identify those conditions, right, that allow for fuller expression. And because this method has proven effective, in the realm of science, the text suggests it should be equally reliable when we explore, spiritual matters.
So a similar process can be applied to both the physical and the spiritual. And this leads to the idea that spirit exists at this fundamental level, almost a quantum level.
Yeah, it proposes that the contemplation of spirit is the true creative force, and that spirit exists, at a fundamental level, akin to the quantum realm. And it uses this analogy of light, being composed of photons that behave as waves, right, with crests and troughs. And it suggests that, within the infinite possibilities that exist between the crests of these waves, what our minds are most focused on, attracts circumstances and events into our waking experience through divine spirit. And sustained focus, through contemplation, allows us to sense these underlying oscillations and the potential within them. And it builds momentum, right, until a significant shift occurs.
That's a really interesting blend of, quantum physics and spiritual principles. And the text also addresses this idea of self-imposed limitations, right? Like the limits are only what we set.
Yeah, absolutely. It says that the only real limits, we experience are the ones we place on ourselves. And this often arises from a lack of awareness of the inherent creative power of spirit, caused by the ego's perception that our physical body is separate from the life of spirit. And it emphasizes that our realization of our connection to infinite spirit is shaped by our innate spiritual attitude, which emerges from our consciousness. And it even suggests that, the whole secret of life lies in understanding that when we place our reliance on spirit, that spirit will naturally create a stronger connection within us. It's about overcoming that feeling of separation, right?
Yeah.
And trusting in a larger interconnectedness.
Overcoming that sense of being cut off and trusting in this like larger web of connection. Now, the text makes a pretty strong statement about consciousness being the sole cause of our circumstances. Let's really dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a central idea. It asserts directly that consciousness is the sole cause of our circumstances, establishing this cause and effect relationship. Big problems in our lives, they can't be truly resolved until there's this fundamental shift or change in our consciousness. And to illustrate this, it describes the very beginning, right, of the universe, as originating from thought. At the initial moment of creation, there were no physical conditions present, only a state of consciousness. So the creative process itself is deemed non-physical, consisting purely of thought and feeling.
So what's happening inside of us is the primary driver of what we experience outside.
That's the core message, yeah. And it uses this analogy of an artist creating something new from simple feelings, right? Mirroring this original act of creation. And it highlights that true creation involves bringing something new, into existence, following this process of orderly growth. And because the divine's fundamental nature is unchanging, it must operate in the same way as all of life, moving forward to create new conditions that haven't existed before. And this illustrates the creative order, this natural progression, right? From states of disorder to order. And it contrasts this with our common tendency to get it backward, right? Trying to create desired feelings based on external conditions.
Well, you often think, if only I had X, then I would feel what,
yeah.
Right? But it actually works in reverse.
Exactly. It challenges that belief that we have to wait for, external changes to occur in order to experience inner, emotional satisfaction. And it questions, these concepts like needing to achieve success, right? To feel empowered or waiting to become, wealthy, to feel abundant. These are outdated ways of thinking that create this unnecessary struggle. And it asks us, do you have the dedication and self-discipline to emotionally, teach your body what your future is going to feel like before it, actually manifests through practices like guided imagery and visualization. It's about, proactively cultivating the inner state that we desire rather than passively waiting for external circumstances to provide it.
So we're taking an active role in shaping our inner world, which then influences the outer world. Now, the text tackles like a really big question here. Can spirit contain evil? Like, what does it say about that?
It offers a very clear perspective on this. It states that the root of all evil is ignorance. Specifically, ignorance that stems from denying spirit's consistent power to create good. And it argues that when we truly, recognize that spirit is expressing itself, individually within each of us, we understand that its inherent nature is to constantly create, good for us. Ignorance, on the other hand, it breeds separation, which in turn generates feelings of lack and resistance, creating the conditions where spirit can be, misperceived as something other than good. So evil isn't seen as this inherent force within spirit, but rather as a consequence of our lack of understanding and connection to it.
So evil is not an inherent part of this, energy, but more a result of our being disconnected from it or misunderstanding its true nature.
That's the perspective presented, yeah. And moving on, the text provides a specific technique for connecting with spirit, and it's particularly geared towards artists.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So the technique involves a series of focused affirmations and a direct question. First, you take a moment to acknowledge, the divine love that exists all around you. Second, you affirm that your own heart is filled with this pure divine love. Third, you declare that you are in a clear, open, and receptive state, filling yourself only with the power and presence of the divine. Then comes the crucial step, right? You ask the question, what is God's highest idea for me to do? And at that moment, you immediately make note of any ideas or inspiration that come to mind, or simply begin engaging in your artistic activity. You know, the key is to be receptive and act on whatever arises.
To be open and act on it. And the text even includes a suggestion for rock climbers, right?
It does, yeah. Before starting a climb, you know, repeating the phrase "Divine Spirit paves my way" or "Divine Spirit paves my way to create this day," and this is suggested as a way to alleviate fear, enhance self-confidence, and even ward off what might be perceived as bad luck, you know, consciously invoking that connection and trusting in its guidance in specific situations.
Inviting that connection and trusting that support. Now let's delve into how the text actually defines creation itself. How does it describe it?
It states that the divine is a manifestation of creation, and it uses the experience of aligning with the divine, you know, and feeling this strong flow of energy as an example of our soul, you know, experiencing creational energy, noting that this flow is directly related to the core of our being, you know, where the God within resides. And it also acknowledges that our soul's connection, you know, with the divine, it can weaken at times, leading us to feel disconnected from our true selves.
And how does the text describe the fundamental, nature of creation itself? What is it?
It's described as pure, clear energy, completely without any, you know, material form or substance, and embodying the highest levels of beauty and wisdom. And because, you know, we exist as spiritual beings, you know, within human bodies, we experience creation as the force that molds, you know, our feelings and thoughts into forms that are in alignment with the fullest expression of life flowing through us. And the text emphasizes that by quieting our thoughts, practicing mindfulness, you know, cultivating awareness, we can have this direct experience of connection with creation, which describes as the very source of our inner being, you know, our desires, our sense of beauty, and our understanding of truth. And the fundamental driving force behind creation is presented as the inherent motivation to bring non-physical ideas into physical existence.
So it's this pure, formless energy that's constantly shaping the reality we experience. And what about the experience of, our soul, you know, when it's connected with creation? What's that like?
Well, it states that as our soul begins to experience, you know, creation's energy moving through it, it knows nothing of, you know, struggle, frustration, or lack. This is because our soul is inherently more expansive, you know, than any challenge we might encounter. Furthermore, creation operates, you know, under universal law, which ensures that we never need to worry about, you know, future conditions, because this original power is always working through us and for us consistently, you know, bringing about the necessary conditions for the expression of life, love, and beauty. It's a very reassuring perspective on the underlying you know, order of the universe.
It really offers that sense of trust, you know, and that fundamental order of things. And how does our own intention, play a part in this process of creation? How do we interact with it?
Well, it explains that clear and definite intention shapes our thoughts and feelings into forms that resonate with those of creation. This allows us to experience the initial spark of new ideas fueled by an inner power, enabling us to bring those ideas into complete manifestation, you know, in the world. And it also mentions that the foundational elements of our universe, you know, they exist as a series of independent, you know, cause and effect relationships that our rational mind perceives as order. And this understanding, you know, allows us to tune into, you know, creational energy. It's about aligning our inner world of intention with this fundamental universal order.
So it's like we're co-creators with this energy. And the text uses a really beautiful image to kind of illustrate our connection to the divine.
Yeah, it uses the analogy of a raindrop in a rainbow, right? Each of us as a divine spark, we're like, you know, one tiny water droplet within this vast and beautiful phenomenon. And simply by existing in this moment, you know, we are worthy, lovable, and inherently connected to the divine because we are made of the same fundamental essence. And the text also emphasizes that creation is constantly flowing through us, much like, you know, electricity through wires, and that its true natural course cannot be altered. And our experience of it is like creation contemplating itself, you know, with each of us acting as this individual reflection of our understanding understanding of God in relation to ourselves. It's about allowing that natural flow, rather than trying to control or dam it up.
Letting that energy flow through us. And the text even draws a parallel to like a principle in physics to explain this.
It does. It compares, allowing creation to flow through us to an engineer, understanding and submitting to the laws of electricity in order to apply them for a specific purpose. We become, conduits or distributors of this divine power, similar to, how physics describes the redistribution of force, rather than its creation. And the text notes that initially, this path of allowing might feel, narrow, but over time it naturally expands because it's the inherent nature of life to continually grow, just as spirit is infinite and without limits.
It's a journey of both inner and outer expansion.
Yeah.
And to kind of briefly summarize creation.
Yeah.
As the text presents it, what are those key characteristics?
It summarizes creation as an infinite, giving, non-judgmental, all-knowing, loving, and expansive energy that is constantly increasing and evolving, from our present conditions. And to connect with it, all we need to do is become